Just after Christmas in the early 1980s, I pack up my untrusty Volkswagen with musical instruments and camping gear to start another migration south, fleeing the cold darkness. This year I have splurged on a Sears tape player and installed huge speakers on both sides of the driver. At full blast, I can hear music over the air-cooled engine. I am hoping to be as far south as you can drive in 2 long days. Interstate 95 is a world of its own, and I'm going through very conservative states at a steady 80 miles an hour. Nowhere else in the South can you pass a policeman while going 80 miles an hour and get away with it. I discover an advantage to my cheap tape player when I notice that it repeatedly makes a funny honking sound just before I see a radar trap. It turns out it's a completely legal radar detector. I make fantastic progress down the road. New Year's Eve, Key Largo. Somehow my timing is off and I'm arriving on Route 1 to the Southern Keys at 11 p.m. As I pull onto the First Keys Bridge, a bright red Camaro roars from a side road in front of me, skids, pinwheels, and slams sideways into the guardrail. Welcome to the Florida Keys. I drive around the smoking Camaro and pull into the next hotel, Carey's Caribbean Cottages, and ask if they have any vacancy. The lady laughs and says, "Sure, $30. I pull out my wallet, but she says, "I think you probably ought to check out the room before you pay me." I just hand over the $30 and walk to my little cabin. It's hard to say where the sand and weeds end and the wall of the cabin starts. As I open the door, I hear a faint scurrying sound. Turning on the light, there is motion on the floor, which then quickly stops. I learn to take all the empty Coke cans and put them outside, because when a cockroach crawls across them, they make a fairly loud noise. Leaving the light on all night, I lie in my clothes on top of the bed and try to sleep. But finally, late the next day, I roll down the seaside Jeep road to the dead end on Boca Chica and the free hippie campground. There's 5 cars parked on the side of the road, and as I walk down the mangrove forest path, I see a few friends from years past. Unloading and setting up my tent near the water, I hear a New Year's beach party going full blast. Joining in, I meet Walt and Jane from Toronto. He is an art professor and she runs a modern dance studio. They are loving the warm weather. Jane points into the woods and asks me about the guy walking past who was wearing no clothes. "Oh, we call him Brown Man. He's harmless. We're not sure where his tent is, but he just never wears any clothes. Other than that, he seems perfectly normal." Walt says, "Walking on the path through the woods today, I came across him and some woman going at it right on the ground." But Richard laughs and says, "Yeah, that's because it's Tuesday. Every Tuesday her husband brings her over here to enjoy Brown Man while he watches. I think they actually bring him groceries each time they show up." Walt says, "Well, as I walked around them, they both said hi to me." I asked Walt how he got that cast on his arm. He holds it up and shows a beautiful shark he's drawn on top. "I was spearfishing for dinner, but I didn't shoot anything. So I came out of the water over by our tent and a branch triggered the spear gun and it went off straight up into the air. But then the safety line stretched out and then yanked the spear straight down towards my arm. Luckily, only the blunt end hit me and not the point. But a broken arm has ruined the snorkeling for me on this vacation." Jane rolls her eyes and said the trip to the emergency room was an adventure in itself. Now they mostly hang out around the campground all day. But I can see that life at the Boca Chica campground is just as interesting as ever. My friend Richard, the guitar player, and I practiced some tunes to play on Mallory Square for the nightly sunset celebration in Key West. Usually Richard and I go 15 miles to town in the afternoon, make a little money in an hour at sunset, have dinner, and then come back home. But one night, sitting around the campfire, Jane is moaning about being stuck in the campground, and Walt says she really wants to go dancing in Key West, but he can't go because of his arm. She looks at me and says, "Come on, let's go." I'm not much of a dancer, but I certainly can't turn her down. For the second time that day, I drive to Key West and park near Captain Tony's. I remember that Jane runs a dance studio, and I hope that I can keep up with her. The dance floor is not real huge, and there are plenty of people fast dancing, but once Jane takes me by the hand, right to the middle of the floor, she starts making room around herself with her wild gyrations. She looks really good and graceful, and I realize I don't have to worry about my dancing because nobody's looking at me. Slowly but surely, she clears the dance floor completely, with everybody standing around and clapping for her, and with me wiggling away at the edge of the circle pretending to dance with her. I'm really just there as a bodyguard, I realize. The bartender keeps sending us free drinks while she puts on quite a floor show that evening, and she's one happy, sweaty girl. We close the place down, stagger back to the car, and I manage to drive us back to the campground, being pretty glad to make it. We're hanging on to each other, laughing away, while weaving down the pitch-dark sandy trail and discover all the campfires are out and everyone's asleep. We're feeling great, and Jane follows me right into my tent. Next morning, I wake up bleary-eyed and alone. Everybody's sitting around cooking breakfast on the campfire. Jane looks disappointed when she whispers to me that as soon as we got in the tent, I immediately passed out. Just another day in paradise. One day, I hear about a teeny rental cottage on Whitehead Street near the center of Old Town. It's behind a great big house in its own little yard, and it's about 12 feet square. It has screen windows all around, a little table and kitchen all in one room with a closet that contains a bathroom. The rent is as small as the house is. Suddenly, I am transformed from wilderness camper to a city dweller. A new life as a resident of the town opens up. If you're born here, you are a true conch, named after that huge seashell. I can only be an honorary conch, no matter how many winters I reside here, but to really fit in, it's essential for me to find the ultimate lower keys transport, a used bicycle. But not just any bike, a Key West special conch cruiser with very high handlebars like above your head, so you can ride through the slow city traffic and see over the cars to weave through the pedestrian chaos. It has very fat tires, which you keep at low pressure so they don't pick up broken glass and give you a blowout. There are wire scrapers across the wheels that flick out any glass fragments that the tire might pick up. And it has a slick trick wheel lock, which you can conveniently snap open and shut with hidden levers that are not at all obvious to would-be thieves. My dulcimer just barely jams into the bike basket, and I can pedal to music jobs without ever using my car. In fact, I don't drive my car for about a month. I can also join the evening bike gang tours where my musician friends ride from bar to bar to pull up and listen to all the different bands. All the bars have huge open windows right on the sidewalk, and you can hear the bands from the street. I join a half a dozen bikers all around town through the evening traffic and pause to listen at about 8 places with live music. Then we go back to the best one, park our bikes, and go in for a night's carousing. Sometimes we listen to a bluegrass band, sometimes jazz, sometimes a cover band, and lots of rock and roll. This is confusing to me because I've never really listened to such different kinds of music. In fact, if I say that a band sounds like bluegrass, I mean it as an insult. So I ask a good musician friend named Jack, how do we choose which band to go and listen to each night? He frowns at me and says, "John, you're too good a musician to ask a question so stupid. Obviously, we always go to listen to the band that's really cooking." I see that I have a lot to learn. Of course, the only reason that there is a town here all by itself in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico is because of its safe deep water harbor. These emerald surrounding waters are almost ignored these days because of the fame of Key West as a party tourist town. I feel lucky that I have many connections to boats in the harbor. From a water point of view, the island looks very small. One evening on the pier looking out at the harbor, my friend Patrice mentions that she's never once been boating here. So we ask to borrow Thatcher's Sharpie for an excursion the next day. This is a small, open plywood sailboat he has built that uses a windsurfer sail. On a bright, sunny morning, we launch off a beach into the warm breeze and head towards Christmas Tree Island, about a half a mile across the harbor. The boat moves easily in the protected water, and we weave around a few other boats as we pass along the waterfront. After a while, the town recedes into the distance, and we approach the uninhabited sandbar island covered with pine trees. Patrice looks back and sees Key West as the island it truly is for the first time, surrounded by blue and green water. After a stroll around the beach and a picnic lunch, we head back on the reliable tropical breeze. As we sail past the Sands Restaurant Beach, we see Gary's 20-foot wood sailboat bobbing at anchor in the shallow water. Patrice says he's got a permanent mooring here, which gives me an idea. The next time I see Gary, I ask him if it's okay if I sit on his boat around noon each day to practice my navigation. He says, sure, you can wade out to it after walking through the sunbathing scene at the outdoor bar. Now, it's very good practice to shoot the sun with a sextant while you're rocking around on a small boat, which mimics realistic sea conditions. Someday I hope to be on a small boat sailing on an ocean, and this is preparation for bigger adventures. Next day about 11, with my plastic sextant, quartz watch, and lunch, I walk past the crowd of beach chairs and skimpy bathing suits, wade through the waist-deep water, and pull myself into the cockpit. If all goes well with my book learning, I should be able to carefully measure the angle of the sun every 10 minutes while noting the exact time for about the next 2 hours. Then determine where in the world is my location. Later, after writing down all my results, I can take a break, wade over to the bar, and then eat my lunch on the boat with a cold drink while doing all the math, try to figure out how close my calculated position is to 24 degrees 34 minutes north, 81 degrees 48 minutes west, the actual location of my beach. Using the nautical almanac and scribbling in a notebook, I determined that I'm about 3 miles away from here, somewhere out in the suburbs. This is considered to be perfectly acceptable for a small boat in the middle of the ocean, and I am very encouraged. After about a month of almost daily practice, my accuracy is fairly consistent, and I have a tan that's brown as a nut. Another day, I'm in a group of local sailors talking about the upcoming celebration in the harbor called the Blessing of the Fleet, where the Catholic Archbishop sprinkles holy water from the dock while the local shrimp boats cruise by, all decorated with colorful flags flying from their rigging. A nice couple that live on a 40-foot cruising sailboat invite me to sail along with them in the fleet during the celebration. Nancy, a tall and attractive blonde, says her husband will be over in the Bahamas that day, but she's having a few friends on board to sail in the procession. I'm very happy to accept, but after she walks away, Thatcher mentions to me that her husband is leaving to arrange a pickup of a load of marijuana, and she's recruiting a crew to smuggle it in their sailboat. Wow, I say. I guess I can always say no. On the day of the boat parade, the pier has a huge crowd, and the harbor is jammed with boats as Nancy picks me up with 3 other guys at the dock. We all help to raise the sails and trim them using the winches as Captain Nancy, wearing a white bikini, gives directions. I'm pretty impressed how she steers this fast, low-slung boat under sail all through the crowded procession of spectator powerboats and much larger shrimpers. At one point, she crosses right in front of a big lobsterman without a second glance. After a while, she pulls out a joint and passes it all around. Cruising faster than the procession, we weave all around the harbor, dodging the other boats. Meanwhile, Nancy tries to recruit us for a 6-day smuggling voyage. The first thing she says is, "My husband will not be on the boat, but there won't be any funny business between me and any of you. Second of all, you won't be paid with your half bale of dope until after we successfully unload in the upper Keys." I have to tell her that I'm not interested, and she quickly drops me off at the dock. I never hear how it all turned out because it's time for me to drive back home, back to reality and the other half of my fractured life with different friends. As I drive north, I enjoy watching the reversing seasons, from summer vegetation in Georgia to dogwoods flowering in the Carolinas to new redbuds and crocuses popping up in the Virginia spring.